All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for this workshop by Creative Careers. My name is Eilish Russell. I am the Associate Director of Career Advising at Art Center. And today we're going to be talking about how to communicate like a creative pro. So I want us to think about our subject for today as not just being about the way that we communicate, but also about general communication standards and expectations, right? So communication is a tool. It's one of the many tools that are in our toolkit as designers for collaboration, for influence, for developing opportunities. And really strong and effective two-way communication is really essential for thriving in the modern creative workforce in any kind of capacity. And while we're kind of thinking about the topics that we're chatting through today, I want you to think about not just what you can do for yourself in the workplace, but also what potentially you should be able to expect in the workplace, or in a freelance capacity, anytime that you're communicating with somebody, excuse me, from a professional perspective. This may not always be the reality every time that you're working with somebody, but these are best practices that you should expect. And not having them or not kind of contributing them to the workplace might be a sign of some areas where we can improve or upskill or kind of work on ourselves or work with somebody else to improve communication. So we're going to be talking about a few different topics today. We're going to talk about writing professional emails, workplace conversations, updating your teammates and kind of project type communication, collaborating as a freelancer, if anybody is interested in that. We're going to talk a little bit about navigating difficult conversations, which can be a big piece here. And then finally, things like self-promotion communication. And for each of these topics, I'm going to try to kind of provide the goals that we have for this style of communication. And then, when applicable, some examples to run through. And I'm really hoping that those examples will be a really great reference point for maybe what your communication could look like. But I want to encourage everybody that this is kind of a starting place. If you have specific questions or are looking for specific templates about these things, we have a lot of those on our website, which I'll link at the end in the chat so that everybody has access to it. So with that, let's get started. We're going to, again, kick ourselves off with writing professional emails and messages. Our goal here is that you're writing emails that are professional, right? Professional, but authentic and specific to your creative voice, that our messages are clear and that they have a specific and appropriate type of action and tone, that we're able to adapt our emails and messages for different types of audiences, depending on who we're reaching out to, and that we can avoid some common email mistakes that might lead to confusion or delays or missed opportunities or understandings. So let's start with some basics, some kind of practical basics. Your professional emails should have or be coming from an appropriate email address. So this could be your Art Center email address, this could be a personal email, but it should be easily identifiable as you. So for example, my name is Eilish. My email might be erussell@gmail.com or eilishrussell@gmail.com. I might want to stay away from something like my childhood email address, which said like amazingdancer553@gmail.com, right? So that kind of appropriate email that includes maybe your first and last name, a first initial and a last name, or even maybe the pseudonym that you use as a designer would all be really appropriate to use in this type of context. Next, we want to make sure that our subject line keywords are easily able to be searched at a later date. So whatever the subject of the email is, we want to include in brief phrase in the subject line. We want to use names or kind of proper nouns when possible when introducing ourselves or when reaching out. So that would be something like Dear Creative Careers or Hi Eilish. We want to use a appropriate sign off. So that might be something like best or thanks again. We want to clearly label and identify any attachments that are in the file name or the email body. So if you're sending your resume to somebody, it might say Eilish Russell resume or Russell underscore E resume. What we might want to stay away from is something like resume 22225 version 6 or something like that that doesn't clearly identify what that document is on its own. And finally, we really want to be mindful of the CC, BCC, and reply all functions. So I'll talk a little bit about those. CC means copying, right? So anybody who is CC'd on an email gets a copy of that email. Anybody who is BCC'd is blind copied, which means the recipient does not see who is BCC'd. And reply all means that you're sending your response email back to everybody who is copied on that message. It's really important to make note that if multiple people are copied on an email that's being sent to you, you likely want to reply all to make sure that all of those people get your response. There are some circumstances where maybe you don't want to do that, but for the most part, you want to reply all so that all of the applicable parties are going to get your response. This really prevents delays, makes sure that the appropriate information gets to where it needs to be, and can be really, really beneficial when we're kind of practicing our professional email etiquette. Some other things that we want to think about, and we'll look at some examples of this in a minute. Make sure that you're finding the right voice or tone for your target audience. So the way that you might email a peer at Art Center is going to be a little bit different than the tone or the voice you would use to reach out to an employer or to respond to an interview inquiry that you're getting for an internship. Avoid jargon and try to be concise. Make it very, very clear what you need or what you're providing so somebody can quickly and easily understand how they can respond to you and then follow through with that. Be really mindful of the language and the phrasing that you're using to avoid coming across as rude or dismissive. The thing about an email or a message is that we're not in the room to hear how somebody might be interpreting our message, right? So we want to make it very, very neutral sounding and just be mindful of our phrasing so that it's clear what we mean. Of course, we want to make sure that we respond promptly and respect deadlines, and we want to be conscious about how we're following up. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but it's very important to be aware of what emails require follow-up and perhaps which ones don't require follow-up or are kind of the end point of a conversation. So let's look at some examples, right? Here we see an email to a prospective employer, and the subject line is titled help, right? With a lot of exclamation points. And the email says, hey, I'm an animation student and I want an internship for the fall. Can you tell me how to get one at your company? Eilish. Let's look at maybe how this email can be improved. So this email, which is again to an employer, says, good afternoon. I hope this email finds you well. I'm a student at Art Center College of Design, majoring in entertainment design, and I'm writing to inquire about the internship program at your company. I learned about the studio through your recent production Panda Party and was immediately drawn to the company's style and storytelling approach. Working at this company would be an exciting opportunity, and I'm specifically excited about the opportunity to learn more about the production process. Are you able to provide details about when you start accepting applications and where I might be able to find posting and application instructions? For further information about me, you can find my portfolio and examples of my work here. Thank you in advance for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Best. So in this email, we have a clear subject line. We want internship opportunities. We introduce ourselves and provide a proper greeting. We give context for why we're interested in taking an internship with this company. And we give context to ourselves by saying, here's a little bit more of my work, and here's what I would love to learn about from you in this moment. We also show gratitude and appreciation for their time, and we have that professional sign off, all of which were missing from that first email. However, we're not always going to be communicating with an employer. Sometimes we're going to be communicating with a peer or with somebody where maybe we feel like the stakes aren't as high or the tone that we need to use is a little bit different. So, what would it look like to send a great email to a department at Art Center? Here we have, again, maybe a suboptimal email. It doesn't contain a subject line, and it says, I need to schedule an appointment with the professional team. I'm available tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thanks. Now, what could this email look like if it was optimized to be the most effective type of professional communication? We might start our email with the subject line, advising appointment assistance. And then our email says, good afternoon. I hope this finds you well. I would like to make an advising appointment to chat with somebody about how to get started writing a resume and a cover letter. How can I best do that? And does your office offer walk-in appointments? Thanks in advance for your assistance. Best. So here we've given a very clear subject line, again, which is very important for that searching at a later date, as I mentioned. We share specifically what we would like to do in our advising appointment, just in case that's important. And then we ask two specific questions. How can I schedule an appointment? And do you offer walk-in appointments? We again show gratitude and say, thanks so much. I look forward to hearing you. And then we sign off again with our full name. And in this particular case, with our student ID number, so that if somebody needs to track us or know that information, we've already provided it and they're good to go. Right? So I hope we can kind of see here how the difference between these two types of emails, one that doesn't provide context, that doesn't contain a subject line, that maybe can seem a little bit demanding or the tone isn't off, versus our second type of email where we're being very deferential, we're clearly stating what information we're looking for, and we're signing off with gratitude and appreciation. So, last few couple of things about emails as we kind of roll through these topics pretty broad and overhead. Make sure that you're checking all of the email accounts where you might regularly be receiving important communication. So that could be your Art Center email and maybe a personal email that you use for things like internship applications or other types of outreach. If you have more than one, it's important to check all of them regularly. I would say at minimum a couple of times a week. This is because ideally, when somebody reaches out to us, we should try to respond within 24 to 48 hours of their initial email, especially if it's time sensitive. But even if it's not, it's really important to respond immediately or as immediately as we can to an email to show that we're receiving it and we're following up on our next steps. If for whatever reason we're not able to respond within that time, it's great to just send a quick email to confirm receipt of the email and let the recipient know when you'll be able to get back to them. So, for example, if you get an email from somebody like my department, and we ask you for a copy of your resume, and you're not able to get that to us immediately, you might say, hi, Creative Careers, thanks so much for your email. I won't be able to send this for a couple of days, but we'll follow up with you on Thursday morning. Thanks so much. That way, whoever you're sending your email to knows when they can hear from you. They know specifically that you've received the email and that you're not avoiding their emails or you've kind of disappeared and are MIA. And they know when they can expect a response from you so that they can make their own plans. All of these points are really, really important, especially as you're preparing for things like internship applications or interviews, job applications or interviews, or for anybody who's interested in freelancing, communicating with prospective clients in the future. So that brings us to our next subject, which is kind of workplace communications or conversations and client communication. So again, we're going to kind of run through these topics a little bit broad and overall. And I really encourage everybody who is maybe interested in a deeper dive into any of these to schedule an appointment with us, chat a little bit more in depth. We'd love to talk with you about any questions that you have about these things. So, for workplace communication or conversations and client communications, our goals are to communicate effectively with all of these different stakeholders, to present our creative ideas and feedback clearly and persuasively, to build rapport while setting boundaries and expectations, and to be able to adapt our communication styles for different personalities or different kind of power dynamics. As in, having a communication with all of your team members versus having a communication with your boss and your boss's boss. Those are kind of different power dynamics where we might want to communicate slightly differently. So, some overall best practices. Give and receive feedback gracefully, right? Remember that as much as possible, we don't want to receive or we want to give feedback very gracefully and not take feedback really personally. Generally speaking, everybody is giving feedback or receiving feedback in order to make a project or an experience or a design brief better and stronger and great for everybody. So focus on work and use clear and actionable terms when you're giving feedback, and show gratitude and ask clarifying questions if need be when you're receiving feedback to make sure that you can follow up on whatever needs to be done. Try to give meetings and any kind of reviews or work conversations your full attention. So that means, again, things like having your screen on if you are meeting virtually, making sure that you're not on your cell phone or working on other things while you're in an in-person meeting, really making it clear that you're committed to being in the space and learning from that space. Make sure that you ask really good questions to understand a brief or an expectation. That way, you know what you need to do and it's clear from the outset. And sometimes you may not be given a really explicit design brief or a checklist. So, if need be, you can always create your own. Have a checklist of things that you want to know about a specific project and use that to ask your questions if need be so that you know you can do your job as best possible. Another great point to think about here is when you're talking with folks who aren't fellow creatives, who aren't designers on your team or artists on your team, it's really important to translate design decisions or processes into plain language and kind of a business value that focuses on outcomes. And rather than just explaining what you did, kind of step by step, or using a lot of that industry focused jargon, you want to focus on why you did something. What was the purpose of that choice and how does it benefit the outcome? This is something that you can practice with our team. Again, we are a team full of creatives and non-creatives alike. And one of the kind of benefits of chatting with us is that we might not work directly in your field. So we'd love to chat with you about how you can talk about your work to somebody who maybe is like us and has a different knowledge base. But it's really important to get practice doing this because sometimes when we're in kind of the bubble or the silo of our creative community at Art Center, we get used to talking about things in certain ways. And it's really helpful to practice speaking a little bit more generally or a little bit more plainly about our work in the long run. So I want to take a minute now, just as we're about halfway through our time and our slide deck, to open up the floor to any questions, excuse me, that anybody might have. So I would love to open up the floor for you to introduce yourselves, check in and say, hey, I have a question. You can ask your question in the chat as well. It can be about something that we've already covered, to chat a little bit more in depth about that, or it can be about something else, which we might cover shortly. So I'll give everybody a couple of minutes there. Again, you can unmute yourself to ask a question. You can drop it in the chat, whatever works best for you. And we'll just wait here for a second to see if we have any questions thus far.
Oh, I'm sorry. I may ask how long the seminar might be because I have a class at 2 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finishing up at 2.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
Great question. Any other questions?
Hi, I have questions about the subject line of the email. 'Cause
Yeah.
sometimes I have some hard time to think about the subject line. So should we include a verb in the subject line or just this subject about our email?
That's a great question. It kind of depends, right? So if I'm sending an email, let's say I'm a student and I'm sending an email to my team, Creative Careers, about getting a resume review. I might say in my subject line, resume review. If I am a student who's interested in an internship or a recent grad who's interested in work opportunities, I might send a subject line that says, internship openings or interested in internship openings or something along those lines. If I am pitching myself, let's say I'm a freelancer and I'm pitching myself to a studio or a company and want them to take a look at my profile or portfolio and see what type of work I do and what kind of benefit I could bring to them, I might get a little jazzier with my subject line and include a verb or something like interested in optimizing your social content, question mark, exclamation point, or um, want to increase your followers by 30% in 2 months, question mark. And that type of subject line or kind of entrance, welcome invitation to our email might be a little bit more appropriate for the type of email that we're sending. So it kind of depends. You don't have to include a verb. We do want to keep our subject lines kind of on the shorter end, but sometimes a verb might help you to communicate what your goal is. Does that help at all?
Yep. And just one more quick question. Should I
Yeah.
capitalize each word in the subject line?
Um, Generally speaking, you want to capitalize words that are not, for example, to or a or for. Some of those kind of smaller filler words. But for example, something like resume review, both resume and review would be capitalized in that subject line.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Those are very specific. Anybody else have any questions at the moment? If not, no worries. Again, we're going to cover some more topics and there will be more time to ask questions at the end, but I wanted to open the door now. Okay, all right, wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, we'll open the door to questions a little bit more in a moment. Right now, we're going to chat a little bit about project communication, updates, things like that. This can be a huge part of your work, whether you are working in-house on a design team, whether you're freelancing. Learning how to update effectively and kind of talk through projects is really, really important. So, for this type of communication, our goals are to keep your team aligned without overloading them with too many emails, too many messages, too much update. We want to make sure that we're sharing the meaningful project updates across the appropriate mediums or forms of contact. So updates should drive decisions, they should reduce confusion, and they should help build trust in the work that you're doing. So for example, we want to update based on what somebody needs to do with our update. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of how we can update and what is urgent versus what is not urgent. But generally, we want to think about whether somebody needs to know this information or whether it is more information that helps us. And finally, our goal is to use tools and templates to kind of streamline our communication across as many workflows as we have, right? As creatives, we're doing a lot of different types of work. We are probably communicating on multiple channels using a lot of different tools. So we want to kind of streamline that as best possible to make it a lot easier on us and to get the right information out to other people. So types of communication that you might find. You might have daily or weekly updates. You might have milestone check-ins. You might have what we might call an ad hoc update or an as needed update. So this might be something like a last minute change or a heads up about something. And then you might have something called handoff communication, like I finished this file or I finished this design. Here it is, instructions for what the next steps look like, or context. And here's a little bit of a breakdown of kind of these update types, the best type of channel for sharing that update as a communication tool, and why. And I want to note here that your individual workplace or client may have a different structure for how they like to receive these. So this is, again, a general overview, and it's best to defer to your supervisor or your teammates for what works best for them. But if you'd like a general overview, for quick updates, especially something that is urgent, which you'll see again at the bottom here, a direct message is really, really helpful. It's fast and informal, and usually if something doesn't require a lot of immediate work or attention, a direct message can be really effective. For something like a major decision or a complex update, you might want to send an email as well as a document link or a tool link or a resource link so that your update is documented and it's really easy for somebody to reference. Again, using an appropriate subject line. This adds context, it reduces misinterpretation, it creates a really great channel or backlog of dates when things were sent and when things need to be updated. For something like asset delivery, so that could be, again, the design work that you've completed, or another update about the project, you might want to add that to a folder, and then let somebody know via direct message or via email that that asset has been added to the appropriate folder. You might also, again, keep things with a specific email under a specific headline, and then again, send a message if that's really immediate. This keeps things really traceable. It keeps all materials that are for the same type of project in the same place so that they're all kind of collectively accessible. And again, as we mentioned earlier, for those urgent changes, for those things that are really, really important for us to address very quickly, a direct call or a direct message might be the most appropriate way of communicating. And it's really, really helpful to ask in advance what constitutes urgency. And if something is urgent, how would you prefer that I contact you? Is it ever appropriate to reach out after hours? If so, how would you like me to do so? If it's never appropriate, what would you like me to do to make sure that something that's urgent gets addressed in the most effective and possible way? So you'll notice that we build good communication habits for something like project updates by communicating and asking really great questions of our team, of our supervisors, of our clients to set really strong expectations up at front. All of this makes sense? Awesome. Okay. So let's look at what an effective status update can look like versus something that's maybe suboptimal. So our suboptimal update is the homepage design is almost ready, right? And that's kind of an update. It lets us know that something is happening. But if we were to improve this, it might look a little something like this. Update on the homepage design. We're 90% done with the visuals and waiting on a final copy from the content team, ETA Thursday. Dev handoff plan for Friday end of day. So this does a few things. It lets our recipient know what almost ready means. We say specifically we're 90% done. This is an approximate, but it gives somebody some context of like, is almost done more than 50%? Is it more than 80%? What does that look like? Then we make it clear what we're waiting on in order for this to be ready. So we say we're waiting on a final copy from this other team, and we give a specific deadline for when they're meant to get it back to us. We say ETA on Thursday or estimated time of delivery on Thursday. Then we say dev handoff plan for Friday end of day. So this is when we're planning on completely closing out this aspect of the design process. That is our internal deadline. This does a few things for our recipient. Number one, it lets them know what we're planning when our kind of internal deadline is, so that if they are fine with that, if everything is great, they know, okay, cool, we're moving ahead exactly as planned. If anything is maybe not ideal for them, they can say exactly that. They can say, is it possible to get this out Friday morning? Or would you be able to get it out Thursday end of day after you receive it from the content team? It also provides a really specific point for if for whatever reason, the final copy that you're waiting on from the content team, in this case, doesn't get it back to you on Thursday, right? Let's say maybe it's delayed and you're not able to do your next step. You have created a chain of information that says, we said we were waiting for it from them on Thursday, and we haven't gotten it yet. Is maybe there a way for your supervisor to ping them or chat with their supervisor, whatever it happens to be? What we're doing is, again, providing the context, providing the next steps, and giving specific follow-up dates for somebody to be able to confirm that that works for them and to work within that kind of spectrum or schedule. Now, our next subject here is about collaborating as a freelancer or with perhaps some of our external partners. So this might be that you are a creative entrepreneur or solopreneur and you are working with a client that you just received. This might be that you work on a team in-house at a studio and you are communicating directly with a client that you have gotten through that company, or any combination of the two. So here, our goals are to foster a productive and respectful collaboration across different working styles and knowledge levels. So we talked about this already, that when we're translating our design work, we need to make sure that the person on the receiving end of that translation knows what the work means or what we're doing based on their knowledge level. So in that case, we might be the design experts. As freelancers, I'm the expert graphic designer or the expert photographer, right? And as the knowledge expert there, it's my responsibility to translate that to you, who's hired me to be the knowledge expert. In the same way that you should expect a client to translate their business or what their needs are to you so that you can best design for them. So, for example, if you're working with, let's say, a healthcare company or an insurance company, you wouldn't just have them say, we're an insurance company who, insert very technical description of what an insurance company does there. You might ask them to kind of rephrase or translate that material into something that you can understand as somebody who doesn't work in the insurance industry. Again, to go back to some of our goals here, this is really about fostering that collaboration and allowing the two knowledge experts who are in the room, or multiple knowledge experts who are in the room, to collaborate as best as they possibly can. And also with the knowledge that we might have different working styles and preferences. Our other goal here is to create documentation and communication systems that reduce friction. And friction can look like a lot of different things. We're going to talk about navigating those difficult conversations in a minute, but part of our goal here is to kind of reduce any instances of things maybe not being communicated effectively so that we can focus on doing our jobs well. So, what does this look like? It starts with writing really clear and inspiring creative briefs when you're talking to your client, right? Making sure that they know exactly what you're preparing to deliver. It also looks like being really aligned on deadlines, on goals, and on review processes. So, is your project with them a multi-stage project? What are the deadlines for each stage? And what specifically will be delivered at each of those stages? And how many reviews and feedback sessions do they get? It also looks like choosing tools that support transparency. So how do you prefer to be communicated? Is that a specific tool that you know that you'll be checking regularly? Letting the client or your external partner, whatever you would like to call them, know specifically what your boundaries are. So what your availability is, what expectations they should have when working with you. And this can look like saying, I am available for communication via email only between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. After 6 p.m., I do not respond to work-related emails. So if you have a question for me, please send me an email within these hours. It might also look like adding on a note that says, if there's something urgent, and here's a list of what qualifies as urgent, you may contact me at this phone number up until 9 p.m. After 9 p.m., I will not respond to urgent matters. We're setting very clear expectations about when and how we are able to be communicated with and about what things, right? And all of this is designed so that our client is able to build trust in us, so that we're able to build trust in our client, and we're able to have as smooth communication as possible to get that work done, produced well, and to have them feel excited about it. And again, because it's applicable here, translating those design decisions into plain language and business value is really, really important. And we really, really want to explain not just what we did, but why we did something. So does a specific design decision show demonstrated increased engagement with social platforms? Does a different design decision really make the user experience easier and more intuitive? Rather than getting into the weeds of specifically what we did, we want to talk about why this is something that they should appreciate as part of our design work. Or we can combine the two so that they see kind of both hand in hand. Which brings us to our next topic. Again, we're almost at the end here of our many topics today, which is navigating these difficult conversations. So here, our goals are to handle these difficult workplace conversations well, so that we can build trust and we can create more opportunities for ourselves. But we're also kind of creating these goals of alleviating stress. Usually something is a difficult workplace conversation because it's creating a little bit of stress in our lives in one way or another. And ideally, we have these conversations so that we can fix whatever the suboptimal situation is for the long term, not just in the immediate, but so that we have systems and processes and expectations in place for the long run so that this situation doesn't happen again. So what are some of the difficult conversations that might pop up or circumstances that might require them in the workplace? And again, these could be when you're a freelancer or a solopreneur navigating a new space like that. It could also be when you're working in-house with a team. And that might be something like a missed deadline. Maybe you missed a deadline. Maybe somebody on your team missed a deadline. Maybe somebody in a completely different part of the company or your client missed a deadline to get something to you, and now it's impacted your work. Other areas might be disagreements over a creative direction. A client might not understand maybe why you decided on a specific design decision, despite your efforts to translate it for them well. You might have a team member who has a completely different creative direction than you do. You might also be dealing with scope creep or unclear requests. And scope creep looks like somebody adding on just one more thing to your to-do list. Or, well, if you're already doing this, then you might as well do this too. It won't take you that long. And it's often couched with, well, it's not that big of a deal, right? And scope keep or unclear requests can sometimes diminish the quality of the rest of our work, can create scenarios where our clients or the recipients of our work are not happy with the work that we're doing. And finally, we might just be dealing with a situation where we're working with difficult personalities. Sometimes the reality is that there's a difficult personality in the room, and we have to communicate well to effectively maneuver that situation. So what do we want to work on here? Some key aspects of difficult conversations are making sure that we address a situation as promptly as we can, rather than avoiding it to make sure that it gets worse, right? When we avoid a situation, It can create a situation where folks maybe think that nothing is wrong or are not aware that something is creating something untenable for you. But also, it can make it seem potentially like you have not recognized that there is something suboptimal going on. Maybe you don't recognize that you've missed a deadline, or don't recognize that you're not communicating effectively with a coworker about the creative differences. Another beneficial note to make here is to assume that somebody else has good intent. Maybe that's not coming through, but to assume that they have good intent, but clarify the impact that what they're doing is having. So, for example, let's say that you have a client who is really kind of creeping on the scope of your work, right? They're adding a new thing to your plate. They are working outside the boundaries of the contract that you established. You can start by saying, I understand that you want this project to be as good as it can possibly be, or I understand that maybe this doesn't seem like a large piece to add to my existing project. However, the impact of your request is that I have less time to work on this other subject. Or I understand that you were really busy and that you missed that deadline because you have many other projects going on at the moment. However, now I'm unable to complete my piece of the project by my deadline. So when we assume that somebody has good intent, but we clarify the way that it's maybe impacted us, we start the conversation off on a really strong note, and it allows them to not immediately become defensive, but just say, you're right, I'm sorry. I didn't recognize that that would be difficult, and next time it won't happen again. Some other important aspects here are to not sugarcoat things, to not say that something is okay if it's not okay, to not say that missing a deadline isn't a big deal if it is a big deal, but just to be kind and clear and direct about what needs to happen. And then, of course, timing and tone, right? We want to make sure that we're addressing a difficult conversation in the appropriate time and in the appropriate way. So, if we have had this difficult creative difference conversation with a coworker, we might not want to necessarily address that around other coworkers at the water cooler or at the lunch table. We might want to schedule a meeting with them or loop in our supervisor to have a meeting with the three of you to chat about it independently and individually. And we might want to use, again, this clear tone to make it clear that we understand that different things are going on, but that we're just looking to create the best working situation that we can. And finally, our last topic for today is our self-promotion communication. So this is things like sending outreach emails to a prospective company. You really love this game studio, you really want to work on their design team, and you want to send them your portfolio. This can also look like pitching yourself as a freelancer, responding to freelance ads online, or even sharing and sending out messages on LinkedIn about the work that you're ready to do. So our goals here are to communicate your creative opportunities or your creative value in a compelling and audience-friendly way, to create outreach messages that lead to opportunities, not to just ignored emails, and to build a habit of self-promotion that feels natural rather than salesy or pitchy, because some folks maybe don't like the way that that feels. They don't like the idea that they're trying to sell themselves. They just want to promote and talk about how great they are as designers. So this looks like having a really strong artist bio, really strong project summaries, and really strong promotional blurbs. It looks like having these project summaries that talk about the challenge you were responding to, what your role was, and what the identifiable outcomes of the project were. So again, thinking about being focused on the business or outcome value rather than just the process of the design work. And finally, making cold emails and outreach personalized and again, value focused. So if you're reaching out to that game design studio that you really want to work with, we're not just saying, I really want to work at your studio. Here's my portfolio. We might say, I love this project that you did. It really inspired this project that I worked on. Or I love your style and I really try to emulate it in a lot of the work that I'm doing myself. It can also look like some things that are a little bit more casual, a little bit less structured or direct from one point of communication to another. So posting behind the scenes or reflections on different types of social platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram. Adding your latest project to your website or your portfolio every month, maybe even updating it on something like your design Instagram or other social channels. Sharing previous client testimonials or case studies, again, about that value add that your work is bringing. And this one is one of my favorites, keeping a brag doc or a list of wins, of outcomes, of nice feedback that you've received. And that can be from your faculty, from your peers, from staff members at Art Center who said, I really love the use of color that you did here. I really love how client focused you are. I really love how quickly you're able to deliver on the deadlines that we have and that you are always prompt and ready to address any issues that come up. All of those outcomes, all of that feedback can be shared with a prospective client, with a prospective employer when you get to meet with them and you say, people that have previously worked with me have said that I'm a joy to work with, that my work is always very client focused, that I have a unique insight on color and light in the imagination space, right? These are all different ways in which we can kind of casually begin some of that self-promotion communication that doesn't just look like directly sending an email to somebody else. So again, with that, I mentioned that we were going to run through many of our topics quite quickly today. So I want to open up the floor again with our last few minutes for any questions, any concerns that anybody has. Again, you're welcome to add them in the chat, to unmute yourself and ask those questions if you're interested, whatever you prefer. And again, they can be about subjects that we've already covered. It can be about other communication related topics, whatever is